Okay, so you guys might notice that the section we just covered on that baseline data, we just got to the bottom of page 1, right? All that information that we're basically here. The reason that is this particular FBA looks at 3 behaviors, so you may be only looking at 1, so don't feel overwhelmed by how heavy this is. But if we look here, I put things in grids. I just feel like visually it's easier to read. It simplifies things. It makes my life easier when I have to go back and plug in this information. You'll see how it's presented there. So frequency in your FBA that you guys have, it'll say behaviors range in occurrence from 5 to 10 times per school day. So I have a count and I give a range. I talk about the intensity. The behavior results in missing adequate content and disrupts the class. So I label as moderate behavior. Duration, each flopping occurrence is under 10 to 30 minutes, with the most common duration being 15 minutes. So I'm giving some information about how long it occurs for, to give a good picture of the baseline. See if, okay, so later, when hopefully our intervention reduces this behavior, is it reducing it in duration, is it reducing its frequency? Hopefully we're able to extinguish it, right? The next little grid you guys see is predictors. It's really helpful for us when planning interventions to know what's occurring before and after behavior. This is going to get us closer to the function. So if we have setting events in a sequence, these are things that happened before. Does anybody happen to know the difference between them? A little tricky.
What are setting events? Does anyone know what setting events are?
Good question. No? No?
What's happening before it happens?
She's got life changes as an example. Kind of those longer triggers. So maybe that morning they had a fight with their mom, or they went to bed last night and had to sleep on the floor. These things could affect behavior the next day, right?
It's going to snow.
It's going to snow, maybe they're sick. Now, setting events are a little bit tricky, I feel like, because sometimes we're getting indirect information about them. Like maybe mom reports that a student tends to do this more when they're ill, and things like that. So you take it under advisement, okay? If across people, across data pieces that you're getting, it becomes kind of apparent that it really is impacting it, you might address it in the interventions, right? So setting events in our predictors here talks about how Paul's more likely to flop following parent report of lack of sleep or illness. So if this student is sick or they don't have as much sleep, you might be more likely to have that refusal flopping behavior that day.
So setting events are a lot of times things that we do not have any control over.
Exactly. Yep. Antecedents are what's happening just before the behavior. So when you guys do your ABC forums, this becomes pretty handy. What is happening right before the student flops? Or what are some of our other behaviors? Or is spinning? Or is refusing? What are some of the things that are happening right before them? Maybe they're asked to do work. Maybe they're asked to transition. Okay, in this example, the prompt to transition, particularly away from a preferred task, or new course material, or the teacher using a lecture format, tended to proceed flopping behaviors and observations. So you're looking for a pattern. So when you use those ABC forms, you don't just take the data and set it aside. You've now got to analyze it. That's why they're called behavior analysts, right? You don't just take data, now we got to do something with it. So you've got to analyze what you gathered and look for patterns. Okay, so you might highlight flopping throughout your ABC observation, and then start noting what antecedents you record. What occurred right before the behavior. Try to be specific, right? And it could be anything happening. Maybe when the class gets loud, the student flops. I know, I think didn't one of your students have, this last year, have issue with kind of loud sounds? Yes, two of them did. be a combination of being given a direction and then the class, then the class being allowed. So anything that's occurring right before the behavior we want to know. And then consequences. Paul is able to avoid and delay the transition of less preferred tasks by engaging in blocking behavior. He also may be accessing attention from staff. Why is this going to help when we plan interventions later, recommendations? What are our recommendations going to be about? Are we going to make recommendations for how to punish a student? Replacement behavior. And we're going to encourage those replacement behaviors by controlling things that are in our control, which are the antecedents and consequences, right? I think that gives power, a sense of power to all of us in a good way that we can help this student. We start to tweak some of those antecedents if we can reduce the number of transitions for them.
And when Courtney says consequences, I don't want anyone to get that confused with punishment. When we're talking consequences, we're not talking how we can penalize that person.
Yeah, consequences are not always negative. It just means what happens after.
Right. Sometimes that's confusing for even our parents.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
I often don't use that word consequences, but that is, it doesn't, that's what it refers to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or what happens after.
Yep. And it's what happens immediately after. So if they're given the direction and they flop and they're ignored and they're allowed to do that, then write that down. Right? No attention given, student remained on the floor. That helps give a sense of what's happening right after. So the ABC charts give you good information for this. Sometimes in the FAST, you'll ask is what's happening right before behaviors, what's happening right after, as well as what was the behavior that you see most commonly. A note on that, when you talk to staff about with the FAST, I try to go through that process of prioritizing a behavior with them, because the FAST is really going to be talking about a single behavior. The student might have multiple. And so you might, and that's why I like it as an interview. Sometimes you have to draw that person back to the behavior we're talking about. So I might phrase the question is, so when you're talking about out of place behavior, and then I ask the question. And that, because they're probably thinking about a lot of behaviors. And so if there are a lot of behaviors that they want to address, I mean, maybe you fill out 2 FASTs. You fill out the 2 prioritized behaviors. But I find it important to kind of redirect. So creating a hypothesis statement. Let's do this really quick.
This is the 3rd part of the FBA instruction regarding hypothesis statements. When writing the hypothesis statement in an FBA, you want one that is objective, similar to when you make an operational definition, we want that objective. You also want this statement to be objective, so that the conclusions can be based on the data that was reviewed and collected, not necessarily on the personal opinion. You also want it to be specific. Statements should include details regarding the maintaining variable rather than simply stating them. So you would want, you might want to say, gaining adult attention versus just gaining attention. ABC data collection is a direct data collection method that we will examine a bit further in the in-person session. I wanted to mention it here so that we can understand antecedent, so for its ABC recording. In traditional ABC recording, as we'll see when we look at it further in the in-person session, would have many different rows with similar information, indicating what is the student's behavior, what's happening right before, and what's happening right after it. This would be a single line in that, where we're seeing at the antecedent here is that the student is given a math worksheet. The behavior in the middle is that the student left the room. And the third one is that the student is presented with the processing. That's their consequence. You want to look for a pattern similar to this in the rest of the incidents during your observation. And then you can utilize those to develop your hypothesis statement. So maybe day after day, time and time again, when given a math worksheet, the student leaves the room and then they're presented with processing. This grid illustrates different maintaining variables in regards to behaviors that
You guys
students
have
might
this
exhibit.
slide in front of you as well.
We'll see across the top that what is the person gaining or avoiding in the situation. So with positive reinforcement, they're gaining something. With negative reinforcement, they're avoiding something. A person might gain social reinforcement, which is reinforcement that is obtained through another person. That would equal social positive reinforcement, where they're gaining attention.
So just really quick, positive and negative reinforcement, right? So they're getting something, they're avoiding something. And along this side, social or automatic. So is it mediated by another person? Are they getting that reinforcement through another person? Or is it just something internal to them? We see that a lot with students today. I see that spinning behavior. Gosh, what else? Spinning things. What else do you guys see? Any other key stereotypic behavior? Okay, lining things up. So that would be more of that automatic side. So you guys will see more of this. When I work with PBD case managers and staff, they don't always see that piece, but you guys might. So when you combine these, you create these different things. It's social positive, social negative, automatic positive, automatic negative. So if you think about it, social positive, they're getting something that's socially mediated. So it might be attention, it might be a tangible. Every time they answer correctly, they get some candy, right? I need to give you the candy. It's socially mediated. Whereas social negative would be they're escaping a demand that somebody gave them. And the expectation is to finish the math worksheet. That's when they run out of the room. And then they don't end up having to do the math worksheet. They successfully avoided and escaped that task. Anybody happen to know the difference between avoid and escape? Just for fun. Nobody? Might be helpful. So if you have an alarm clock, how many of you used an alarm clock this morning? Okay, I did too. If you woke up 10 minutes before that alarm clock and you turned it off because you're getting up anyway, you're avoiding. You didn't want to hear it. Just turned it off so you didn't even have to experience it, right? Let's say you have a problem with a neighbor. You're walking on one side of this, you're walking on the same side of the street of you. You don't want to interact with them, so you just go to the other side, right? So you're avoiding. You're not even encountering it. You're just flat out avoiding it to begin with. This sometimes is missed with our students. Sometimes they often go to the health office right before math class. They're avoiding. And it's hard to sometimes make that connection because they didn't experience it yet. They didn't experience math yet. They weren't presented with that math worksheet. It was just before that class. So you look for those kind of patterns in the time of day too. Escape's different. Escape is now they're experiencing it. So your alarm clock goes off and what do? You make it snooze and you make it stop. But now you've experienced that annoying sound and you want it to stop. Your car seatbelts do the same thing. Sometimes we buckle up before it begins, so we don't even have to hear it, avoiding. Sometimes we buckle up once that annoying sound has begun. We're escaping. So maybe you couldn't cross the street and you have to get to that neighbor and you keep it really short. Yep, I gotta go, bye. So you escaped it. But you did encounter it. If you can't successfully avoid, usually you'll escape. And vice versa. Okay? So the social is kind of what we see a lot. Again, though, with students with ASD, you're going to see stuff along the bottom here. You're going to see that automatic reinforcement, automatic positive and automatic negative reinforcement. Now, remember we talked about consequences being something that happens after? What type of consequences happen if you drive fast? Speeding ticket. Now, if you get a speeding ticket, are you going to maybe slow down in the future? Sure. So that's a punishment. I got you to reduce your behavior. Or just seeing a police officer to cause you to slow down. So I got you to slow down, didn't I? What about, what's that? Oh. Now, if you're a race car driver and you're going fast, you get a reward for that, right? same behavior, different contexts, could be rewarding for somebody, could be punishing for somebody. So when we talk about this, these are things that are maintaining the behavior, right? These are all reinforcers. These are all increasing and maintaining that behavior occurring. Punishers decrease. So automatic reinforcement. Some of your students might be sensory seeking. How many of you have students that are sensory seeking? How many? What are some of the sensory pieces they seek? Squeezing, okay. Peer attention. So those are socially mediated. So think just sensory. Just internal process. Spinning, chewing, touching, rubbing, twirling hair. Anybody have a student who seeks pressure? Maybe they try to hug a lot. Okay. So, hold on. Okay. So those are the automatic positive reinforcement. So the thing about it is that they're not socially mediated, right? You don't have control over that reinforcer. They do it, they get reinforced immediately. Right? Thumb sucking. Automatic negative is a little different. So sometimes I've seen students who have like an ear infection and they're going like this. Now this is a behavior that's not really good. Maybe they're making their ear red. Maybe they're cutting their skin while they do this. But to them, it's trying to stop the pain, right? And so maybe the behavior is to alleviate some sort of pain. Again, those things are internal processes. They don't really have much to do with interacting with another person, right? I think that automatic behaviors can be difficult to work with because we can't control the reinforcement that they get from it. I can't take away that feeling they get when they do that, right? There are strategies though, like just if you ever want me to help you with a specific case, but you can satiate them, meaning you give them an hour to chew on that chew toy, and then they don't have it like the next hour. Sometimes that fulfills enough of that chewing need that they have, and then they can kind of step away from it. So there's different strategies like that to address automatic behaviors. The point is that with you guys, you want to make sure that you're addressing it. Those things aren't the reason for what you're seeing. Okay. So when I see this grid, and it might be helpful for you guys to continue to look at this grid and come up with your own examples. Because this is how you're going to be explaining why the behaviors occur. These are the 4 main functions for behaviors. And then you take that and you put it into a hypothesis statement. I gave you guys a generic template of a hypothesis statement. And in the FBA, you guys will see that after the FAST results I presented, after I might address any current interventions being used and their effectiveness, then I talk about the hypothesis. This is a template for writing that hypothesis. It's just saying the behavior is more likely to occur when, maybe they're setting a bed, when presented with whatever the antecedent is, math worksheet. The student engages in what's targeted here, hitting, in order to escape. Okay. And then typical responses to target behavior include maybe, and this is the part that we're not always proud of, right? So maybe they are accessing, maybe they get reduced work when they do that, right? So that is the reality. What happens is their work is reduced. It's not pretty. It's just what is. So a recommendation might be, let's ahead of time reduce the work. We want to build up their tolerance for that work so that they don't want to escape it. I'm a big proponent of getting ahead of a behavior, right? I don't like them doing this on their terms. I like them doing it on my terms, so if I can reduce the work ahead of time, then I'm kind of in control of that, and then I'm
Or they feel like they are in control.
Sure.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then we gradually increase tolerance. That's something that staff sometimes have a hard time with, the reduction. well, everybody else is doing the whole worksheet. Well, yes. But this student currently isn't. They're not doing any of it. So, they're doing it right now. How is that working for you? So then say, well, let's draw it back with the plan of building it up later. There should always be a plan to increase those expectations, to increase the demand. We're only reducing temporarily. By the way, whoever is on that video, we should hire them. Okay. No, sorry. The other behaviors listed, I just offered you guys that template repeated. So you'll see spinning. Then you have passive work refusal. I did fill in a little bit there for an example. But you guys see my process, right? Try to keep it simple, try to keep it structured, trying to share the information I got. Again, maybe you're addressing one behavior. This particular one addresses before we talk about the behaviors work plan, I just want to highlight the end of the FBA here. There's a couple things I do. Again, take from it what you like. I like to include a summary of the student interview. And the reason I do this is it supports my hypothesis sometimes, and so that I like to include it. Student reports that they like getting candy when, they refuse to do something. That seems backwards, but sometimes they do get candy. You're trying to entice them back to the past. Again, planning ahead. Hey, do this to get candy. Don't wait for them to refuse something. I summarized the FAIT results. You guys had in your data sheets a parent form and a staff form for those. Sometimes I just summarize them along the 5 areas it covers. Like I'll hand it out to 3 staff, I get it back. So under student strengths across 3 staff, is there anything that they're commonly saying or anything that's worth mentioning that stands out? It's helpful. Triggers, responses, perceptions of the function. Again, if there's some pattern across staff, or if the parent information dies with that, I might summarize it. I have recently started including this other information section because I came across some unique situations. In this example at FBA, there wasn't anything relevant, but you might include something like medical or mental health information as it relates to that problem behavior. So we've had self-harm problem behaviors, and if I have something from medical professional or mental health professional, give some additional information about that or support the hypothesis, or maybe they've offered caution. Had that happen. They say, the student's really susceptible to self-harming when they're pushed past this point. So that's a cautionary thing, right? Sometimes I include that now. Just for, I think it's helpful information. And then I make my recommendations. Do I just pick out of a bag, hey, this is always good to do? No, I go back to the functions. I start with each one. So I determine the function of flopping. What did we say the function of that was? What did the hypothesis say? We'll go with it. There were possibly 2. We'll go with escape demands, right? So being a behavior analyst, I have lots of ideas about strategies to use with students who escape demands. And then I kind of tailor them to the situation. I might reduce the work initially with a plan to increase. I might reduce the time in class if appropriate. Things like that. The point is, if they're trying to escape a demand, you want to reduce those demands and increase their tolerance for it. So I go behavior by behavior, function by function, and I try to create recommendations that address that behavior, and address that function. So if they're seeking attention by acting out in class, maybe it's appropriate to plan to give them attention at other times. Okay, and then plan to ignore whatever the intervention is. And then I just gave you guys an example at the end there of a present level summary for the FBA. Last piece here is the behavior support plan. This comes from the FBA. I'll just keep talking for a minute. I have one more slide and then we'll finish with the FBA part.
Do you want these handed out yet?
Oh yeah, go ahead. That's the example positive behavior support plan. There's two things. The first thing is more of a generic, like, hey, this is what this question's asking you to do. And then there's another one with an actual student example.
This is the final instructional segment for FBA instruction online. It's part 4, where we're going to look at positive behavior support plans. The first question you might ask yourself is, when do you create a positive behavior support plan? There's many answers to that. We'll try to dive into that a little bit more in the in-person session, but generally anytime that the student's behavior interferes with their educational progress, the progress of other students, you could look at creating one. Anytime maybe that there's a significant change in a student's behavior that is affecting maybe safety, you might need to address that quickly with this as well. Maybe when there's a change in their federal setting, or when you need a detailed and individualized program. We're just going to briefly go through the sections of the positive behavior support plan. The first one is to indicate the need for this plan. And you would want to reflect on the FBA and utilize the description of target behaviors from that, and any other information that's relevant as to why you're creating this plan. You can, so the next one, talk about student strengths, any strengths that they may have. Then you want to move on to the hypothesis statement. You want to draw this also from the FBA, and make sure you're including one for each target behavior.
The great thing is, a lot of this comes straight from the FBA, right? We've got student strengths over there. You're just highlighting the need based on behaviors. And then the hypothesis statement comes right from the FBA, as long as it's still addressing the same behaviors. They positive behavior plan.
When considering what antecedent setting up strategies to incorporate,
This last slide has these pieces listed. Okay.
you want to be thinking about interventions that can occur prior to the target behavior being displayed. In other words, proactive strategies. When looking at antecedents, and again, this is any event occurring immediately prior to the behavior, you could implement a strategy such as prompts. Prompting behaviors, providing a visual in order to elicit the appropriate behavior in place of the inappropriate behavior. Setting events, these are the precipitating factors that influence the student's engagement in their target behaviors. Examples might be, maybe they didn't sleep well the night before, maybe they're upset about something that happened. It could be a lot of things, maybe they're hungry. Mainly things that you may not know specifically, but can impact their behavior. It's a little bit different than an antecedent in that it's not occurring immediately prior to the behavior. It's something that's happened maybe earlier that day or the day before, or maybe even further back. And an example of a setting event strategy might be to give preferential seating if the setting itself, you notice that they, maybe if they are more tired when they sit towards the back, well then maybe we move them towards the front. You might also try to reduce other factors as best you can. Like if they're not getting out of sleep at night, maybe you provide a social story about the importance of sleep, or try to give that instruction as well. The next section is alternative and replacement skills. These are the skills that you would like to see in place of the problem behaviors. So you would want to talk about how will the skill be taught, practiced, and reinforced. So the skill might be taught directly through maybe some direct social skills instruction. Maybe it'll be practiced with role play, and maybe it'll be reinforced with tokens when they've successfully practiced or demonstrated their knowledge. Consequence interventions are interventions that occur after the target behavior has happened. So let's say that the alternative replacement skills that were taught or the antecedent setting event strategies maybe were unsuccessful at times and the behavior still occurs. Well, we still need a plan in place for what to do after that behavior occurs. So these are more the reactive strategies. So it could be that once a student goes out of place, maybe in your plan the first step is to make sure that the doors are closed in the building. Make sure that the student is being safe. Then providing intermittent verbal redirections. The last piece here is a crisis intervention plan. This is an optional section on the form. You may choose to use it in order to describe what an emergency situation would be considered for the individual student, and also a description of appropriate staff responses, whether that be the use of restrictive procedures, contacting the police, or contacting health professionals that may detail when those measures would be taken.
Okay, does everybody have the example positive behavior support plans? Okay, so you should have kind of a generic one that just talks a bit about, I try to just give tips about like, hey, this is what this question is asking, here are some things to think about when answering it. Does it make sense? Or here's what you need to include in this section. And the other one is an actual student positive behavior plan, a little bit more detail. So when you think about all the sections, they're really just addressing solutions to support that student make better patterns, replacement behaviors being good, right? So a lot of times they're just a skill deficit. So it's a matter of teaching, practicing, and reinforcing that skill. Sometimes they just need prompting to help them remember to use the skill. So that's an antecedent strategy. Maybe they need to take breaks. Maybe they take scheduled breaks. Those are antecedent strategies, right? Before the behavior occurs. Or implementing strategy. So that's the main purpose of this, is to kind of get ahead of it. What can we do to help the student? Practice, teach, reinforce, and look at antecedent intervention. It also outlines what to do if the behavior does occur, right? Because how you handle it once it does occur also matters. What are they accessing? So if it's something that they've been doing to get attention, we want to make sure that they don't get attention going forward. Flip side, the antecedent intervention might be to give them attention during other times. Does that make sense? Okay. What I want you guys to do, I'm going to go back to the 4 function slide, right? Where we have the social, automatic.
The thing to remember, really important about a positive behavior support plan, is to make sure everyone who's working with that student knows that plan. Because to have a plan written and nobody looks at it does not help.
Exactly. Exactly. So, this might detail that reinforcement of tokens. Well, if they're supposed to be getting tokens throughout the day, and some of the teachers don't know that they get the tokens, then it's not working. Right? That would be carrying it out, and
And you might have to teach those people that are working with that student how that plan works, because maybe they don't quite get it.
Exactly.
So that everybody's doing things consistently the same. The language is the same. You're reinforcing that student at the same rate. So discussing that with everyone who works with the students.
Okay. What I want you guys to do is, for each in your groups, in your tables, if you have a small group, you can always join another one. I want you to look at the 4 maintaining variables, right? So we have positive, social, negative, automatic, positive, automatic, negative. And I want you to just come to some consensus about a behavior for each that you're looking at, right? So maybe they spin, maybe they hit staff, or whatever, maybe they get attention. Who knows? So just come up with something for each one of those before. Think about what replacement skill you would want, right? So if they're hitting, hands and feet to self. Right? So now you have your replacement skill, and I want you to think about what antecedent and what consequence interventions would you use to address that skill. Sense. So for example, if we're going with that hitting, maybe they're hitting to get attention, so I'm checking off that first box, addressing that one. So they're hitting for attention. Antecedent-wise, I'm going to give attention. First thing in the morning, we're going to meet. Midday, we're going to check in. At the end of the day, we're going to check in again. So I'm structuring some attention times with them. I might reinforce when they seek attention appropriately throughout the day. Maybe they raise their hand, get rewarded. And then what happens if they do hit? How will that be addressed? What are the consequences? Kind of planning for that. So I think with our time, you can actually just pick one. So pick one of these. So social positive, social negative, automatic positive, or automatic negative. Come up with some antecedent interventions, come up with some consequence interventions that address that function. Make sense? I'll come around and help out too. As will my After that, it talks about consequence interventions. What they really intend to mean at this point is we've already addressed how we're going to reinforce the replacement behavior. So at this point, we're really just talking about what do we do when that problem behavior happens again? Because it will. I mean, they just don't all of a sudden stop doing it, right? That'd be great if they don't. So they talked about, okay, so what if the student does put their head down and refuse? What were your guys' strategies? So now they've done this behavior again, what do you do?
Well, what I've done is giving them 5 minutes to process.
Okay. So step 1, give time and space.
And then go and kind of redirect.
Step 2, redirect. So sometimes you might just get through step 1, that time and space, and they're back on task. Maybe you need to go to that redirection. Then they get back on task. Maybe it doesn't. What I like about doing in the consequence section, I like these steps. It's kind of like a how to handle the situation when it does happen. So that everybody's on the same page and handling it the same way. The idea is to get back to the demand. The demand stays. The work expectation stays. Maybe it was reduced to begin with, which is great, strategy antecedent-wise, but the expectation is to still finish this. The idea there is that we want to highlight exactly what to do so that if it is example attention maintained behavior, that we're not giving attention, that we are giving time and space maybe, or redirecting infrequently. Those strategies help reduce that interaction that provides that attention to begin with that behavior. So always coming back to the function helps you create a positive behavior support plan, helps you think about what antecedents are appropriate and what consequence interventions are appropriate. The middle part about teaching, practicing, and reinforcing, it's all about the replacement behavior. How do we get that to happen more? We want to increase that and we want to decrease the problem behavior. One last thing I'll mention is that when you guys implement these sort of plans, like I said, the behavior doesn't drop immediately. What might actually happen? It might increase immediately. It's really important we communicate this to staff because then they automatically assume the intervention isn't working and then they abandon it. So I always like to prepare them like, hey, just so you know, this might increase for a little while and that's okay. That's actually, when students get to that point, I actually get excited because it's showing it's working. It might not seem that way, but it is. An increase means they're responding to the intervention. Yes, if they have to try harder, that makes it less reinforcing for them. I'm going to make it harder for them to make it reinforcing. And then the reinforcement plans, for a lot of the students you see, those behaviors should be reinforced pretty quickly. I've been in classrooms where they say, I just don't get it. It's been a month and he still has not earned his super special, amazing, huge reward up here on the cabinet. Well, maybe that's because it's been a month and he hasn't gotten rewarded at all. So it's finding the moments and rewarding those. So that's what that middle section about how to teach, how to practice, and how to reinforce the replacement behavior. Let's just say that's not going to come naturally to them, right? They're not going to just start doing it all day, every day. You have to build on the small steps. So that reinforcement plan might be to reinforce that just even as you're practicing it. Maybe they're not going to do it naturally at first. Maybe it's just in the practice sessions that they do it. Reward them.
A month is a really long time, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a student one time who, gosh, he was really challenging, a preschooler. And he just would not, it was hard to find those moments that he was doing anything right or appropriate, right? It seemed like he was just always being kind of naughty. And it occurred to me one day that I just had to find my moment. I just had to find my moment to reward him. And so the next day, that was my goal for the day. I'm going to work really, really hard to find my moment. His moment. And I found it. He walked past somebody and he did not hit them. It was awesome. And so I said, I really like how you kept your hands and feet to self. Here you go. And I rewarded it. And that was the start of something big. Because then he made that connection. A lot of our kids, it's hard for them to make that connection because they're not used to getting reinforced. Or they're used to getting reinforced for inappropriate behavior. So making that connection is really, really important. So that middle section, teach, practice, reinforce, is just the backbone of getting the correct behavior to increase. It just won't on its own. All right, any questions? All right, there's one slide about sped forms. And we're defining the positive behavior support plan. So if you're in the IEP, in the bottom right corner, positive behavior support plan. And then you know in the accommodation section.
So is everybody using the positive behavior support plan right now? If you have positive support plans in place. So as your meetings come due, we're going to change over for those that may have better behavior interaction plan to positive behavior support. That would be the form that we're using now.
Follows the FBA rule. So I think it's kind of yeah.
And then those are the plans that you can print out for your staff that are working directly there on the front lines working with the students. So that they have that information, maybe highlight some of the really important information, especially the crisis plans. If you're in a situation, what you do, and you can see this is what needs to happen. Any last questions, comments, concerns? Well, on behalf of the Rubber Special Ed Cooperative, I'd like to thank you for your